I gave my greedy heirs exactly what they wanted. Every dollar. Every acre. Every piece of property they had whispered about for months. They smiled before the reading even began. And then my attorney reached the final sentence. Everything changed. If you've ever wondered what greed can do to a family, stay with me until the end. And before we begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Tell me your city in the comments. I read every one of them. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 68 years old, and until 2 years ago, I believed my family was my greatest accomplishment. My late husband, Richard, and I spent 43 years building a life together in a quiet Ohio town. We weren't born into money. We earned everything we had the old-fashioned way. He worked 6 days a week running a small plumbing business, while I taught second grade at the local elementary school for more than 30 years. We never lived extravagantly. We drove our cars until they could barely make it through another winter. We patched our own fence instead of hiring someone. We skipped expensive vacations because there was always another tuition bill, another home repair, another dream our children needed help reaching. By the time Richard passed away, we owned our home, nearly 40 acres outside town, and enough savings to enjoy a peaceful retirement. Or at least, that's what I thought. Something shifted after the funeral. It wasn't immediate. No one demanded money. No one raised their voice. That would have been too obvious. Instead, it came in quieter ways. Conversations stopped whenever I entered the room. Family dinners suddenly included long discussions about planning ahead. My oldest son started asking questions about deeds and trusts he'd never cared about before. My daughter-in-law, Melissa, became sweeter than she'd ever been. She baked my favorite apple pie. She called twice a week just to check on me. She insisted I shouldn't have to worry about paperwork at my age. At first, I mistook kindness for love. Looking back now, I realize it was something else entirely. And I wasn't the only one in that room pretending. For a while, I convinced myself I was imagining things. Grief changes the way you see the world. After losing Richard, every room in our house felt too quiet. I'd catch myself reaching for a second coffee mug before remembering I no longer needed it. So when my children started acting differently, I blamed my own loneliness. But little moments have a way of adding up. One Saturday afternoon, my son Daniel stopped by with Melissa. She carried a casserole dish through the front door, smiling as warmly as ever. "You shouldn't be eating frozen dinners," she said. "We're family. We have to take care of each other." It sounded thoughtful. It even felt comforting. Then, while I was setting the table, I heard their voices drifting in from the living room. "She'll probably downsize eventually," Melissa whispered. Daniel answered so quietly I couldn't make out every word. Then I heard one sentence clearly. "If Mom sells the land, we need to make sure it stays in the family." They fell silent the moment I walked back into the room. Melissa smiled again, almost too quickly. "Everything okay?" she asked. I smiled back. "Just getting the iced tea." That became our new routine. They'd stop talking whenever I entered. Then they'd smile. Always the same smile. A week later, Daniel offered to help organize my financial records. He said it would make life easier if something unexpected happened. I thanked him, but told him I still handled my own paperwork. He laughed. "I know, Mom. I'm just thinking ahead." Thinking ahead. I started hearing those words everywhere. At Sunday dinner. After church. Even during phone calls that lasted barely 5 minutes. No one asked how I was sleeping. No one asked whether I missed Richard. Instead, conversations drifted toward retirement accounts, property taxes, insurance policies, and the 40 acres Richard and I had spent decades paying off. After a while, it stopped feeling like a coincidence. Because grief makes you question yourself. But once I finally saw the pattern, I couldn't unsee it. From that point on, I stopped listening to what my family said. I started paying attention to what they did. It's amazing how much you notice once you stop trying to convince yourself that everything is fine. Melissa began calling almost every other day. Just checking in, she'd say. Sometimes she'd ask if I'd remembered to take my blood pressure medication. Other times she'd offer to drive me to the grocery store or help with the yard work. On the surface, she was the picture of a caring daughter-in-law. But every conversation somehow found its way back to the same subjects. The house. The land. The future. One afternoon, she stood beside me on the back porch, looking out over the pasture Richard loved so much. "It's a lot for one person," she said softly. 40 acres is hard to manage. I nodded. It is. You've worked your whole life. Maybe it's time to simplify. She wasn't wrong. Maintaining the property had become harder since Richard passed. Hiring help wasn't cheap, and my knees reminded me every morning that I wasn't 40 anymore. What bothered me wasn't her suggestion. It was how often everyone seemed to have the exact same suggestion. Daniel mentioned selling the land. My younger son, Michael, casually asked what neighboring farms were worth these days. Even my granddaughter, who had never cared about real estate before, asked if I'd ever considered moving into a retirement community. None of them pressured me. That would have been obvious. Instead, they planted little ideas, one conversation at a time, as though they had all reached the same conclusion independently. It was strange. Everyone kept bringing up the same ideas, almost the same way. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, I couldn't ignore it anymore. One evening, after everyone had gone home from Sunday dinner, I noticed a folder sitting on the kitchen counter. Daniel must have forgotten it. I wasn't trying to snoop. I simply picked it up to call him. Then a single sheet of paper slipped onto the floor. Across the top, in bold letters, were the words, "Estimated property value." And beneath that, my home. My land. My future. Reduced to numbers on a page. I stared at that paper for a long time. Not because the number surprised me. Richard and I had always known what the property was worth. What unsettled me was that Daniel had never once asked me if I was happy living there. He'd never asked whether I still enjoyed watching the sunrise over the pasture or feeding the birds from the back porch every morning. But somehow, he knew exactly what the land could sell for. I slid the paper back into the folder before anyone noticed it was missing. When Daniel called later that evening asking if he'd left anything behind, I simply said, yes. I put it by the front door. He sounded relieved. I'll swing by tomorrow. Nothing more was said. Neither of us mentioned the appraisal. That silence told me everything. Over the next few weeks, I stopped offering opinions during family dinners. Instead, I listened. Michael talked about rising property values in our county. Melissa mentioned how expensive it had become to buy farmland. Daniel joked that someday the grandchildren would have quite an inheritance. They laughed. So did I. It was easier that way. People reveal more when they believe you've stopped paying attention. One afternoon, I drove to the small community bank where Richard and I had done business for nearly 40 years. The branch manager, Linda, greeted me by name. She asked about my garden. She asked about Richard. She asked how I was really doing. It was the first genuine conversation I'd had in months. Before I left, I asked a simple question. If someone wanted to change a will, how private is that process? Linda didn't seem surprised. She smiled kindly. Private enough that only the people you choose will know. I thanked her and drove home. For the first time since Richard's funeral, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long while. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. That evening, Melissa called again. She cheerfully reminded me that the whole family wanted to spend Sunday together. I accepted the invitation without hesitation. Because they still believed I was exactly who I'd always been. A lonely widow who trusted everyone. I decided not to correct them. Sometimes the strongest move isn't letting people know you've seen through them. It's allowing them to believe you never will. The following Tuesday, I made an appointment with Richard's attorney. His name was Thomas Bennett, and he'd handled our legal documents for nearly 25 years. He knew every piece of property we'd ever bought. He knew how hard Richard had worked to leave something behind for our children. When I walked into his office, he didn't ask about the will. He asked how I was holding up. That simple question nearly broke my heart. "It's been quiet," I answered. He nodded as though he understood exactly what I meant. After a few minutes, I told him everything. Not dramatically. Just the facts. The sudden interest in my finances. The repeated conversations about the land. The appraisal sheet Daniel accidentally left behind. Thomas listened without interrupting. When I finished, he folded his hands across the desk. "Evelyn," he said gently, "has anyone pressured you to change your will?" I thought about the question. "No." He waited. "They've never asked directly. And that's what concerns you?" I smiled faintly. "No. What concerns me is that they don't have to." He understood immediately. Some forms of pressure never sound like pressure. They're wrapped in concern. Hidden inside helpful advice. Disguised as love. We spent the next hour reviewing every page of my estate plan. Thomas explained that I could change anything I wanted. Or nothing at all. The choice was entirely mine. Before I left, I made one request. "I don't want anyone to know I was here." He gave a reassuring nod. "Your privacy is protected." Driving home, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not because I had made any decisions yet. Because I finally remembered something grief had made me forget. The life Richard and I built belonged to us. Not to the people already dividing it in their minds. That Sunday, the whole family gathered for dinner again. Melissa hugged me at the door. Daniel carried in dessert. Michael teased me about rooting for the wrong football team. For a moment, everything looked perfectly normal. Then I noticed Daniel glance toward the hallway. Toward the small filing cabinet where I'd always kept our important papers. It lasted only a second. But sometimes a single glance tells you more than an entire conversation ever could. After that Sunday dinner, I changed one small habit. Instead of keeping my important documents in the filing cabinet by the hallway, I moved them to the fireproof safe Richard had installed years ago in the bedroom closet. Almost no one knew it was there. Richard used to joke that buying the safe was the most expensive insurance policy we'd ever own. Back then, we were thinking about storms and house fires. We never imagined we'd be protecting ourselves from family. I didn't tell anyone I'd moved the papers. I simply waited. 3 days later, Daniel stopped by unexpectedly. "I was in the neighborhood," he said, holding a cup of coffee from the diner down the road. "Thought I'd check on you." It was a Wednesday morning. Daniel hadn't stopped by without calling first in years. We sat on the back porch for a while, talking about ordinary things. The tomatoes in my garden. The unusually warm spring. A baseball game we both watched the night before. Then, almost casually, he said, "Mom, where do you keep all your paperwork these days?" I looked at him for a moment before answering. "Oh, here and there." He laughed. "You've always had a system." "I still do." That seemed to disappoint him. Not enough for anyone else to notice. Just enough for a mother who had spent 40 years reading children's faces in a classroom. A few minutes later, I excused myself to make fresh coffee. When I came back into the living room, Daniel was standing near the hallway. Right beside the filing cabinet. He stepped away almost immediately. "I was just looking at that family photo," he said, pointing toward the wall. I smiled. "It's one of my favorites." I didn't accuse him. There was no reason to. Sometimes people tell you the truth without saying a single word. That evening, I sat alone on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the trees Richard had planted decades earlier. For the first time, I stopped asking myself whether my children had changed. Instead, I asked a different question. How long had they been this way, and I had simply chosen not to see it? A few days later, I decided to do something I hadn't done in months. I invited everyone over for a Saturday barbecue. Nothing fancy. Just burgers on the grill, potato salad, fresh lemonade, and the peach cobbler Richard loved every summer. The grandchildren played tag across the backyard while the adults gathered on the deck. For a little while, it almost felt like the family I remembered. Daniel laughed with Michael over an old fishing story. Melissa helped clear the dishes before I even asked. Watching them, I understood why people miss the warning signs. Kindness and calculation can look surprisingly alike. As we finished dessert, I mentioned something almost casually. I've been thinking about making a few changes around here. 4 heads turned toward me at once. Melissa smiled first. What kind of changes? Oh, nothing major, I replied. Maybe organizing my paperwork, simplifying a few things. Daniel leaned forward. That's probably a good idea. Michael nodded. It'll make life easier. Again. The same script. Different voices. I took a sip of iced tea before adding one more sentence. I may even meet with an attorney next month. No one spoke for a moment. It lasted only 2 or 3 seconds. But silence has its own language. Melissa recovered first. Just to make sure everything's up to date. Something like that. She smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. The conversation drifted back to baseball and summer vacations, but I noticed something had changed. Daniel checked his phone twice in less than a minute. Michael grew unusually quiet. Melissa watched me more carefully than before, as if trying to decide whether I'd said more than I intended. I hadn't. In fact, I had told them exactly what I wanted them to hear. That evening, after everyone left, my phone rang. It was Thomas Bennett. Evelyn, he said, I received an interesting phone call today. I frowned. From whom? There was a brief pause. Someone from your family contacted my office asking whether you'd made any changes. As you know, I couldn't discuss anything. My heart didn't race. It settled. Because I already knew the answer before he said the name. Daniel? I asked quietly. Thomas exhaled. Yes. After I hung up with Thomas, I didn't feel angry. Strangely, I felt relieved. For weeks, I'd been wondering if I was reading too much into small moments. Now I knew I wasn't. Daniel hadn't called my attorney because he was worried about me. He called because he was worried about something else. The next morning, I drove to Thomas's office again. This time, I wasn't looking for reassurance. I was ready to make decisions. Thomas welcomed me into the conference room with a folder already waiting on the table. I had a feeling you'd be back, he said with a gentle smile. I think I've stopped hoping this is all a misunderstanding. He nodded but didn't criticize my children. That was one of the reasons Richard and I had trusted him for so many years. He dealt with facts, not emotions. We reviewed every page of my estate plan once more. Thomas explained each option carefully, making sure I understood exactly what every change would accomplish. I asked dozens of questions. Not because I doubted him. Because I wanted every decision to reflect my values, not my disappointment. Richard and I had always believed that an inheritance wasn't just about money. It was about responsibility. About gratitude. About honoring the sacrifices that built it. Somewhere along the way, my children had started seeing it as a reward they had already earned. That afternoon, I signed a revised estate plan. Not out of revenge. Not to punish anyone. But to make sure the legacy Richard and I built would be treated with the respect it deserved. Before I left, Thomas slid the signed documents into a secure file. Would you like me to notify your family that your estate plan has been updated? I smiled and shook my head. No. They'll find out when the time is right. As I walked to my car, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. For months, I had been reacting to everyone else's expectations. Now, for the first time since Richard's passing, I was making choices for myself. What I didn't realize was that my family was about to become even more impatient. Because when people believe something already belongs to them, waiting can become its own kind of frustration. It didn't take long for the atmosphere to change. No one mentioned lawyers anymore. No one brought up wills or paperwork. Instead, my family became unusually attentive. Daniel started mowing my lawn every other weekend. Michael called just to ask how my doctor's appointment had gone. Melissa dropped off homemade soup twice in the same month. If someone had looked from the outside, they would have said I was the luckiest mother in Ohio. I almost wished that were true. The kindness wasn't fake. That was the complicated part. I never doubted they loved me. I just started wondering whether they loved me more than what they thought I'd leave behind. That's what made it hurt. People often imagine betrayal as one terrible moment. In real life, it usually arrives mixed with genuine affection. One afternoon, Melissa and I were folding laundry together after she'd insisted on helping around the house. She held one of Richard's old flannel shirts for a moment before placing it neatly into a basket. "I still miss him," she said quietly. "So do I." She looked around the room before speaking again. "You know, Richard always wanted everyone to stay close. He did. It would be nice if the property could keep the family together." I smiled gently. Families stay together because they choose to. She didn't answer. Instead, she changed the subject and asked whether I needed anything from the grocery store. That conversation stayed with me. Not because of what she said. Because of what she didn't. No one ever asked what I wanted for the years I still had left. They talked about the future as though I were no longer part of it. A week later, Thomas called again. "There will be a formal reading when the time comes," he reminded me. "Everything is prepared exactly as you instructed." "I know. Are you certain about the final provision?" I looked out across the pasture where Richard had taught our boys to ride bicycles decades earlier. More certain than I've ever been. After we hung up, I stood there for several minutes, listening to the wind move through the old oak trees. Richard used to say that character isn't revealed when life is easy. It's revealed when people believe no one is watching. Soon, everyone in my family would discover that someone had been watching all along. The maple trees lining the driveway turned shades of gold and crimson. Just as they had every year since Richard planted them. Some things in life never change. People do. By October, my family had settled into a strange routine. They visited more often than they ever had before. Daniel fixed a loose handrail on the porch without being asked. Michael offered to winterize the tractor. Melissa brought pumpkin bread one weekend and homemade chili the next. Anyone watching would have thought my children had suddenly become devoted caretakers. Maybe part of them had. But every kind thing they did made me wonder the same thing. How much longer? No one ever spoke those words aloud. They didn't have to. I could see it in the way conversations paused whenever I mentioned making plans for next spring. I noticed it when Daniel looked surprised after I said I was thinking about planting another vegetable garden. Melissa laughed politely and said, "You'll have tomatoes for the whole neighborhood." But there was something uncertain behind her smile. As if she'd already imagined a future where someone else owned this house. One afternoon, my oldest granddaughter Emily stopped by after her college classes. Unlike the others, she never asked about money. She asked about her grandfather. "Grandma," she said while we shelled fresh green beans together, "I miss hearing Grandpa's stories." "So do I." She smiled. "I hope this place never changes. It still feels like him." Her words stayed with me long after she left. For the first time in months, I realized not everyone measured this home in dollars. Some people measured it in memories. That evening, I called Thomas. "I'd like to add one more letter," I told him. "A personal letter?" "Yes. To be read with the will?" I looked at Richard's photograph sitting on the mantel. No. After the final sentence. Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he said softly, I think that may be the most important part. So did I. Because legal documents divide property. But sometimes, one honest letter reveals what a family has become long before anyone argues over an inheritance. As the months passed, I stopped wondering whether my decision was the right one. Instead, I focused on living the life Richard and I had worked so hard to build. By the following spring, I planted another vegetable garden. Just like I said I would. Tomatoes. Green beans. Sweet corn. The rows weren't as straight as Richard used to make them, but they were mine. Every morning, I'd carry a cup of coffee onto the back porch and watch the sun rise over the pasture. Some mornings, I could almost hear Richard's boots crossing the gravel driveway before dawn. Grief never really disappears. It simply learns how to sit quietly beside you. My family kept visiting. Birthdays came and went. Sunday dinners continued. The conversations stayed pleasant. No one mentioned attorneys anymore. No one mentioned inheritances. Whatever questions they still had, they kept them to themselves. I did the same. One evening, Emily came over with a photo album she'd found while cleaning out a closet at her parents' house. Inside were pictures I'd almost forgotten. Richard teaching Daniel to bait a fishing hook. Michael asleep on his father's shoulder after a county fair. Melissa laughing beside a picnic table during one of our first 4th of July cookouts together. We weren't always divided. That was the hardest part to accept. Somewhere along the way, life became less about sharing memories, and more about calculating futures. Emily looked at one of the photographs and smiled. Grandpa always said people should leave things better than they found them. He did. She closed the album gently. I think he meant more than just land. So do I. After she left, I placed the album beside the letter Thomas had prepared for the reading. One preserved the best years of our family. The other explained why those years couldn't be measured in dollars. A week later, Thomas called one last time. Everything is ready, he said. The documents? Yes. The letter? Exactly as you wrote it. I thanked him and quietly set the phone down. For months, everyone had believed the story would end with an inheritance. They were wrong. It was never about who received the property. It was about what the final sentence, and the words that followed it, would reveal about every person sitting in that room. The reading took place on a quiet Monday morning. Everyone arrived dressed in dark colors, polite smiles resting on their faces. Thomas greeted each of them with the same calm professionalism he'd shown our family for decades. I wasn't there, of course. This part of the story belonged to them. Years earlier, I had instructed Thomas to read every word exactly as I had written it. He began with the formal language every will contains. The house. The savings. The investments. The farmland. Exactly as they had expected. According to Thomas, Daniel smiled. Michael leaned back in his chair. Melissa quietly reached for Daniel's hand. For a brief moment, they believed the future had unfolded exactly as they had imagined. Then Thomas reached the final clause of the will and paused. He looked up at the room, then read it aloud. Should any beneficiary challenge this will, force the sale of the Carter family farm within 10 years, or initiate legal action against another beneficiary over this estate, that beneficiary's entire share shall immediately pass to the Carter Community Scholarship Fund. The room went completely still. Daniel slowly lowered his eyes. Michael stopped smiling. Melissa quietly let go of Daniel's hand. Only after the will had been completed did Thomas reach for a separate sealed envelope. Mrs. Carter also asked me to read this personal letter. That was the moment the legal documents ended, and my final words began. I told them I had never wanted my children to compete for what Richard and I spent a lifetime building. I reminded them that the greatest gift we ever gave them wasn't 40 acres of land. It was 40 years of sacrifice. I told them that wealth can build a house, but only character can keep a family together. And I ended with one simple truth. If this letter disappoints you more than losing me ever would have, then you've already inherited far less than your father and I hope to leave behind. Thomas later told me no one spoke for a long time. Not because they had lost. Because, for the first time, they were forced to see themselves through my eyes. I kept my promise. I gave them exactly what they thought they wanted. One final sentence decided whether they were ready to keep it. As for me, I found peace long before that letter was ever opened. Because forgiveness doesn't always mean changing someone else's heart. Sometimes, it simply means protecting your own. And if my story reminded you that love should never be measured by what someone hopes to inherit, thank you for spending these moments with me. Take care of the people who still have time to hear your voice. One day, that may become the greatest inheritance you ever leave behind.